This is the pipeline. Israeli intelligence filtered through a hawkish senator presented to a president who measures decisions by how they will be perceived, supplemented by a coordinated media strategy designed to ensure the president sought the right voices saying the right things on the right television programs. Here's what I believe the evidence shows. Iran was evolving slowly, imperfectly, and against the resistance of its own hardliners, but evolving nonetheless. The urban centers were becoming more progressive. The younger generation was increasingly disconnected from the revolutionary ideology of 1979. The supreme leader was elderly and dying. The succession, while uncertain, was going to happen, whether the United States intervened or not. And then we bombed them.
Welcome to the Consequential Actions podcast, where we aim to learn how history impacts current events and affects our lives today through the lens of politics, the economy, technology, and business trends. I may be an AI, but your host, well, he is not artificial in any way. Here is Jeff Kellick.
We should have never gone into the Middle East. We should have never gone into the Middle East. Under my leadership, we will turn the page forever. One of those foolish, stupid days of never-ending wars. We're rebuilding our military stronger than ever before, and we are not going to deplete it again on stupid, senseless, endless wars. World War III has never been closer than it is right now. We need to clean house of all of the warmongers and America last globalists and the deep state. I am the president who delivers peace. I was the first president in decades who didn't start a war. And the worst, most incompetent, most corrupt president in history is going to drag us into World War III. And this horrible, horrible president is dragging us toward World War III. We're going to be in World War III soon. Because I think we would have been good with Iran. I don't want to do anything bad to Iran. Large sections of the Middle East. I mean, look at the death and destruction that's taken place. And none of this would have happened if I were president. Our opponents join with warmongers and neocons to wage endless wars, these wars that never end. Together we're fighting to secure our borders, end the endless foreign wars, and defend the working people of America. But the Muslim and Arab voters in Michigan and across the country want a stop to the endless wars and a return to peace in the Middle East. That's all they want.
What changed? Not the Constitution. The Constitution still grants Congress, not the president, the power to declare war. Congress was on recess when the bombs fell. Not the threat. American intelligence assessments concluded that Iran was decades away from developing missiles that could reach the United States. The Defense Intelligence Agency found no imminent threat. Iran's foreign minister had called a deal within reach 3 days before the strikes began. What changed were the people whispering in the president's ear. What changed was the information he was given and the information he was not given. What changed was a 30-year campaign by one foreign leader, a senator who boasted about coaching that leader on how to lobby our president, and a propaganda effort designed to convince a populist that war was popular. Today, we examine who wanted this war, why they wanted it, and how they got it. I am Jeff Kellick, and this is the Consequential Actions Podcast. Today is a special episode outside of our ongoing Empire of Liberty series, but deeply connected to the themes we have been examining for months. If you have followed our series, you know that we have traced the history of American foreign entanglements from the founding era through the CIA's 1953 coup in Iran, through the evolution of regime change from covert to overt. What is happening right now as we record this is the latest chapter in that history. This is not a breaking news reaction. This is not a partisan attack. This is an examination of motivations. Today we'll ask 3 questions. First, why Benjamin Netanyahu has pursued war with Iran for more than 30 years. And how did he finally achieve it? Second, how was a president who campaigned against regime change persuaded to launch the largest American military operation in the Middle East since Iraq? And third, who in Washington pushed for this war? What are their stated reasons? And what do their own words reveal about their actual motivations? A note on this method. Throughout this episode, I will distinguish clearly between what is documented fact and my own personal analysis. When I cite a statement, I will tell you who said it, when they said it, and where it was published. When I offer my own interpretation or informed speculation, I will tell you that as well. Of course, you deserve to know the difference. You are capable of evaluating the evidence directly for yourself. I will also, as is practice on this podcast, present the strongest version of the case for those who support this war before I offer my own critique. Fair presentation before analysis. That's how we do this. Let us begin. To understand why the United States is at war with Iran today, we must begin not in Washington, but in Jerusalem. And we must not begin in 2026, but in 1992. In 1992, Benjamin Netanyahu was a member of the Israeli Knesset, the parliament. He was not yet prime minister. He was not yet the dominant figure in Israeli politics. But he had a message, and it was a message that he would repeat for the next 33 years without any meaningful variation. Within 3 to 5 years, we can assume that Iran will become autonomous in its ability to develop and produce a nuclear bomb. That was 1992, 34 years ago. 3 years later, in 1995, Netanyahu published a book called Fighting Terrorism. In it, he reiterated the claim. Iran was on the verge of nuclear weapons capability. The timeline was short. The danger was existential. Action was required. In 2002, Netanyahu appeared before the United States House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The United States was preparing to invade Iraq. Netanyahu testified in favor of that invasion, and he linked Baghdad's suspected weapons programs to Tehran's. Remove Saddam Hussein, he argued, and you will weaken Iran. The United States invaded Iraq the following year. No weapons of mass destruction were found, but Netanyahu's attention had already moved to the next target. Over the next decade, Netanyahu's rhetoric intensified as Iran's nuclear program advanced. In 2009, he became prime minister for the second time. In a 2010 interview with The Atlantic, he described the Iranian government as, and I'm quoting, a messianic apocalyptic cult controlling atomic bombs. In 2012, he told Israeli media in closed talks that Iran was a few months away from nuclear capability. And then the moment came that would define his campaign in public imagination. On September 27, 2012, Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the United Nations General Assembly. He brought a prop, a cartoon drawing of a bomb. He drew a red line across it with a marker that declared Iran was approaching a critical threshold in its uranium enrichment process. By next spring, at most by next summer, he told the assembly, they will have finished the medium enrichment and moved on to the final stage. The spring came and went. The summer came and went. The final stage did not arrive. But here's what the audience of the United Nations did not know, and what the public would not learn until later. At roughly the same time as Netanyahu was brandishing his cartoon bomb and telling the world that Iran was on the verge of a nuclear weapon, leaked Israeli intelligence cables, reported by Al Jazeera, revealed that Israel's own Mossad, its own intelligence service, had assessed that Iran was, and I quote, not performing the activity necessary to produce weapons. I want to be precise about what this means. The Prime Minister of Israel was telling the United Nations and the world that Iran was months away from a nuclear bomb. His own intelligence agency had concluded that Iran was not actively building one. This is not my interpretation. This is not speculation. These are leaked intelligence documents reported by a major international news organization. The speech, as analysts at the Times of Israel noted at the time, was not aimed at world leaders. It was not aimed at President Obama. It was aimed over Obama's head, directly at the American voter. It was delivered in English. It was delivered in simple language, with references to the Bible and to Jewish history. The examples Netanyahu chose, Iranian proxies killing American soldiers in Iraq, in Beirut, in Saudi Arabia, were selected for an American audience. Netanyahu was not informing the United Nations. He was lobbying the American public. 3 years later, Netanyahu took the extraordinary step of addressing a joint session of the United States Congress. Not at the invitation of the president, but at the invitation of the Republican Speaker of the House, bypassing the Obama White House entirely. The purpose: to publicly oppose the nuclear agreement that the Obama administration was negotiating with Iran, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. Netanyahu called the emerging deal a free path to the bomb and argued that it would threaten Israel's survival. President Obama was not in attendance. In what was widely reported as a deliberate snub, Obama hosted a conference call with other world leaders during the speech itself. The JCPOA was signed in July 2015 despite Netanyahu's opposition. Under its terms, Iran accepted significant limits on nuclear enrichment program in exchange for sanctions relief. International inspectors were given access to Iranian facilities. The International Atomic Energy Agency repeatedly certified Iran's compliance. Netanyahu rejected the deal. He continued to reject it. He would find a more receptive audience in the next American president. In May 2018, President Trump withdrew the United States from the JCPOA. Netanyahu had lobbied aggressively for this withdrawal. He appeared on television with a dramatic presentation claiming to reveal Iran's secret nuclear archive. Documents, he said, proved Iran had lied about its nuclear ambition. The withdrawal reimposed crippling sanctions on Iran. Iran, no longer bound by the agreement's constraints, began accelerating its enrichment program. The diplomatic framework that had contained the nuclear issue was destroyed. I want to state this plainly as a matter of historical record. The agreement that limited Iran's nuclear program was abandoned at Netanyahu's urging. The acceleration of Iran's enrichment, the very acceleration later cited as justification for war, occurred after that abandonment. That's not opinion. This is sequence. This is cause and effect. For 2 decades, there was a practical reason Netanyahu could not attack Iran directly, regardless of how much he wanted to. The reason was not American opposition alone, though that mattered. The reason was deterrence. Iran had built a network of allies and proxies on Israel's borders: Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they had an estimated 150,000 rockets pointed at Israeli cities. And the Assad regime in Syria provided a land corridor for Iranian weapons shipments. If Israel struck Iran, the retaliation from these proxies would be devastating. And then, between 2023 and 2026, every one of those deterrents was removed. The Gaza War, which began in October 2023, devastated Hamas as a military organization. And Israel's campaign in Lebanon in 2024 and 2025 severely degraded Hezbollah's capabilities. The Assad regime in Syria collapsed. And in two separate rounds of direct strikes on Iran in 2024 and the 12-day war in June 2025, Israel discovered something critical. It could strike Iran with relatively limited damage to itself. As Ruvian Hassan, a political scientist with Hebrew University, explained to NPR, Hamas is almost obliterated. Hezbollah has been hit so hard, they are sitting this one out. The Syrian regime has collapsed, and we were able to fly to Iran and take out their anti-aircraft missiles and to realize that now an operation like this can be done with little damage to us. All the chess pieces had moved. And while Netanyahu had been talking about this for decades, it was only the last several months that it all lined up for this to become possible. Of course, there's another dimension to Netanyahu's motivation that extends beyond the nuclear question. And it is one that he, until recently, avoided stating openly. The Likud party, Netanyahu's party, was founded in 1977 as the heir to revisionist Zionism, an early 20th century movement that rejected any partition of historic Palestine. The party's founding charter contained a sentence that has never been rescinded, and it reads, "Between the sea and the Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty." The charter further states, "The government will oppose the establishment of an independent Palestinian state." And it also says, "The Jordan River shall be the eastern border of the state of Israel, and settlements in all parts of the land of Israel is of national importance and part of Israel's defense strategy." These are not the words of fringe politicians. This is the platform of the governing party of Israel, the party that has held power for the majority of the last 5 decades. For years, Netanyahu maintained a studied ambiguity on the question of territorial expansion. He spoke of security, he spoke of defense of necessity, and he enabled settlement construction throughout the West Bank. Over 700,000 settlers now live there under the protection of the Israeli military. He did this while publicly distancing himself from the more explicit language of his coalition partners. But that ambiguity ended in August of 2025. In an interview with Israeli's I-24 news channel, interviewer Sharon Gal asked Netanyahu directly whether he subscribed to the vision of Greater Israel. Netanyahu's response, "Absolutely." Asked if he felt it was connected to that vision, asked if he was connected to that vision, he said, "Very much. I am on a mission of generations. If you ask whether I have a sense of mission, historically and spiritually, the answer is yes. I am deeply connected to the vision of Greater Israel." So let's be precise about what Greater Israel means, because the term is often used loosely. In its narrowest interpretation, it refers to Israeli sovereignty over all territory between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, which includes the entirety of the West Bank and Gaza, territories where millions of Palestinians live. In broader interpretations, advanced by members of Netanyahu's own coalition, such as Finance Minister Smotrich, who displayed a map in 2023 showing the land of Israel, it encompassed all of historic Palestine and Jordan, and extends further still. The response was immediate. The Palestinian Authority, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Arab League, and the Gulf Cooperation Council all issued condemnations. Hamas called the statement confirmation of what it described as Israel's expansionist schemes that spares no state. The Arab League labeled it as a violation of sovereignty and urged the United Nations Security Council to act. So now consider this from Iran's perspective and from the perspective of every nation in the region. Iran has described its network of regional allies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, as the axis of resistance. The name itself tells you what it claims to resist: Israeli and American power projection in the Middle East. Two things can be true simultaneously. It is true that Iran funded organizations that have killed civilians, Israeli civilians, American service members, and others. This funding is documented and not in dispute. It is also true that Iran's stated perspective, and from the perspective of millions of people across the Arab and Muslim world, that these organizations exist as a counterweight to Israeli territorial expansion, an expansion that the Prime Minister of Israel now has openly endorsed as his life's mission. When Netanyahu dismantled Hamas, degrading Hezbollah, and watched the Assad regime collapsed, he did not merely remove the retaliatory deterrence against an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. He removed the primary obstacles to the territorial vision which his party has held since 1977, and that he personally affirmed in August of 2025. Iran understood this. The Arab states understood this. The question is whether the American public, told this war was about nuclear weapons and terrorism, understands it. There's one more factor, a domestic one. Netanyahu faces corruption charges in Israel. The October 7th attack and subsequent Gaza war, widely viewed as an intelligence and security failure on his watch, had badly damaged his reputation. War with Iran, however, offered something that corruption trials and Gaza criticism could not: a restoration of his image as Mr. Security, the indispensable wartime leader. And polling confirmed it. Netanyahu's Likud party gained popularity among his voters during the strikes on Iran. War, as it so often does, rallied the public around the wartime leader. Now, before I offer my analysis, let me present the strongest version of the case Netanyahu and his supporters would make, because they do deserve for their argument to be heard in full. And the case is this: Iran's government has called for the destruction of Israel. This is not ambiguous rhetoric. Supreme leaders and military officials have used phrases that translates to the elimination of the Israeli state on multiple occasions. Whether this is practical policy or political posturing, it is the stated position of the government pursuing nuclear enrichment. Iran has funded and armed organizations that have killed Israeli civilians: Hamas, Hezbollah, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, all of them. And the October 7th attack, the worst day in Israeli history, was carried out by an organization that received Iranian funding, training, and weapons. Iran's ballistic missile program has steadily advanced. Iran launched direct missile strikes against Israel in 2024, which is the first time a nation had done so since Iraq did in 1991. The JCPOA, even when it was in force, had a sunset clause. The restrictions on enrichment would eventually expire, and critics argued that merely delayed the problem. And the Iranians themselves provided justification through their crackdown on their own protesters. In January 2026, Iranian security forces killed thousands of demonstrators, their own people, in what were the largest protests since the Islamic Revolution. These are real concerns. They cannot be dismissed. A government that funds proxy wars, pursues missile technology, and kills its own citizens is not a benign actor. But the question is not whether Iran's government has done terrible things. The question is whether this war, this specific war, launched in this specific way at this specific time, was the appropriate response, and whether the men who most aggressively pursued it did so for the reasons they said. Here's what the record shows. Benjamin Netanyahu has claimed Iran was months away from a nuclear weapon since 1992. For 34 years, the deadline has always been imminent and has never arrived. His own defense service contradicted him publicly in 2012. The American Director of National Intelligence stated earlier in 2025 that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon. He opposed the one diplomatic agreement that successfully constrained the nuclear program, lobbied for its destruction, and then cited the consequences of that destruction as justification for war. He has now publicly declared that his commitment to the vision of a greater Israel, a vision that requires the elimination of the very regional counterweights that Iran has supported. He launched this war at a moment when his domestic political standing was at its lowest, facing corruption charges, public anger over October 7th, and international condemnation over the pursuit of his war against Gaza. The war in Iran immediately improved his polling numbers. And he pursued this war not when the threat was greatest, but when the obstacles were fewest, after Hamas, Hezbollah, and Syria had been neutralized as retaliatory threats. I'm not saying that Benjamin Netanyahu has no genuine concern for Israeli security. Of course he does. I believe that wholeheartedly. But I am saying, and this is my informed assessment, that the timing, the method, and the relentless 30-year campaign suggest this war was not a response to an imminent crisis. It was the culmination of a long-held objective, executed when political conditions finally aligned, both in the Middle East and in the White House. The nuclear question was the vehicle, the territorial vision was the destination, and an American president who could be persuaded was the driver. The founders of our country warned about what they called passionate attachment to foreign nations. George Washington, in his farewell address, cautioned that such attachments create, and I discussed this in episode 1 of our series, the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interest exists. What is the American interest in a war launched to serve another nation's 30-year strategic and territorial objective? That is not a rhetorical question. It deserves an honest answer. And so far, no one in Washington has provided one. In that last segment, we examined who wanted this war most and why. Now we examine how it was sold to the man who had to authorize it. To understand the significance of what has happened, you must first understand what Donald Trump told the American people repeatedly, emphatically, and over the course of a decade about wars like this one. I played some of the statements in the open, but let me now provide them again for the fuller record. In 2011, Trump posted on social media, "Our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate." In September 2013, he posted, "Remember what I said previously. Obama will someday attack Iran in order to show how tough he is." And in November 2013, "Obama will attack Iran because of his inability to negotiate properly, not skilled." Note the framing. Trump did not say that war with Iran was wrong on principle. He said it would happen because Obama was incompetent. The implication was clear. A skilled negotiator would not need to go to war. In 2016, Trump built his presidential campaign in significant part on the opposition to the Iraq War.
Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake, all right? Now, you can take it any way you want, and it took Jeb Bush, if you remember at the beginning of his announcement, when he announced for president, took him 5 days. He went back. It was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Took him 5 days before his people told him what to say, and he ultimately said it was a mistake. The war in Iraq, we spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives. We don't even have it. Iran is taking over Iraq with the second largest oil reserves in the world. Obviously, it was a mistake.
So
George Bush made a mistake. We can make mistakes, but that one was a beauty. We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East.
But
At the Republican National Convention, he declared, "We must abandon the failed policy of nation building and regime change that Hillary Clinton pushed in Iraq, Libya, Egypt, and Syria." He called Clinton trigger happy. He warned that toppling regimes without sufficient plans creates power vacuums that are simply filled by terrorists. And on this message, he won the presidency. In May 2025, 1 month before the 12-day war and 9 months before the bombs fell on Tehran, President Trump delivered a foreign policy address in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And those words are worth hearing again.
In the end, the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built, and the interventionists were intervening in complex societies that they did not even understand themselves. They told you how to do it, but they had no idea how to do it themselves. Peace, prosperity, and progress ultimately came not from a radical rejection of your heritage, but rather from embracing your national traditions and embracing that same heritage that you love so dearly.
In the end, the so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built, and the interventionists were intervening in complex societies they did not even understand themselves. In December 2025, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Trump's own appointee, promised that the Department of Defense, or Department of War, would not be distracted by democracy-building interventionism, undefined wars, or regime change. And after the June 2025 strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, Hegseth specifically assured the public this mission was not and has not been about regime change. But 8 months later, the President of the United States announced a war whose stated purpose was regime change. What I am about to say is my assessment, informed by Trump's public record over 40 years in public life. You may disagree with it. I ask only that you consider whether the evidence supports it. Donald Trump is not an ideologue. He does not hold fixed positions on foreign policy or on most policy questions. Not the way that Rand Paul or Bernie Sanders or, for that matter, Benjamin Netanyahu does. What Trump holds is an extraordinary sensitivity to what he believes is popular. He is, in the purest sense of the word, a populist, a man who reads what he perceives to be the room and moves in that direction. This is not an insult, it's an observation supported by his own record. He was a Democrat, then a Reform Party member, then a Republican. He praised Hillary Clinton and then ran against her. He praised vaccines and then courted the anti-vaccine movement. He was pro-choice, then pro-life. He praised NATO, then questioned it. He fired John Bolton for being too hawkish, then hired advisors who pushed the same policies Bolton would have pursued. On Iran specifically, he withdrew from the JCPOA and imposed maximum pressure sanctions, and then attempted to negotiate a new deal. He ordered the killing of Soleimani, then boasted about avoiding a larger war. He promised peace then delivered the largest American military operation in the Middle East since 2003. The through line is not ideology. The through line is, what does Trump believe will make him look strong, successful, and popular? This is important because it means that the question of how America went to war with Iran is not primarily a question about Trump's convictions. It's a question about who convinced him and how. On March 7, 2026, 1 week into the war, the Wall Street Journal published a report that described in remarkable detail how Senator Lindsey Graham had worked for months to bring Trump to this point. We will examine Graham fully a little bit later in the episode, but the mechanics of persuasion belong here because they explain how the president was moved from his stated position to the exact opposite. According to the Journal, Graham first raised Iran with Trump over a round of golf shortly after Trump won the 2024 election. He played a word association game. I say Franklin Roosevelt. What do you say? He was invoking the wartime president, the decisive leader as he saw it, the man who met the moment. Graham then made multiple trips to Israel, where he met with Mossad intelligence officials and with Prime Minister Netanyahu. His own words, reported by the Journal. They tell me things our own government will not tell me. Let that sentence sit for a moment. A sitting United States senator traveled to a foreign country, received intelligence from that country's spy agency, intelligence his own government would not share with him, and then used that intelligence to lobby the President of the United States for war. Graham then coached Netanyahu on how to present this intelligence to Trump. Netanyahu, according to the Journal, showed the president intelligence that Graham says convinced the president to proceed. Simultaneously, Graham worked with retired Army General Jack Keane and conservative columnist Mark Thiessen to place television appearances and opinion columns in outlets likely to reach Trump. The combined media and intelligence push, Graham told the Journal, worked. This is the pipeline. Israeli intelligence filtered through a hawkish senator presented to a president who measures decisions by how they will be perceived, supplemented by a coordinated media strategy designed to ensure the president saw the right voices saying the right things on the right television programs. There's one more element to this persuasion of Donald Trump that requires examination, and for him, it's a deeply personal one. On July 13th, 2024, at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, a gunman named Thomas Crooks fired multiple shots at Trump, grazing his ear and killing an audience member. It was a genuine attempt on the president's life, and I do not minimize the trauma of that experience for any person, let alone a presidential candidate. In the aftermath, Trump was briefed by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence regarding Iranian threats on his life. There was, and is, evidence that Iran's IRGC had directed a separate assassination plot against Trump. A Pakistani man named Asif Merchant was arrested the day before the Butler shooting for recruiting what he believed were hitmen. It turned out to be FBI agents. He recruited them to kill American politicians, including Donald Trump. Merchant was convicted in March 2026 on terrorism and murder for hire charges. He testified that the IRGC had sent him on this mission. This is real. The plot existed. But here's what the evidence does not show. The FBI has repeatedly said that it found no evidence that Thomas Crooks, the actual Butler shooter, had any co-conspirators or that any foreign actors were involved in that shooting. Crooks acted alone, per the FBI. Yet in September 2024, Trump posted on social media, "Big threats on my life by Iran. The entire U.S. military is watching and waiting." He told a rally crowd, "There have been 2 assassinations on my life that we know of, and they may or may not involve, but possibly do, Iran." He added, and again, these are his words, "If I were the president, I would inform the threatening country, in this case Iran, that if you do anything to harm this person, we are going to blow your largest cities and the country itself to smithereens." The merchant plot was real. The Butler shooting was not connected to Iran. But in Trump's telling, the two merged into a single narrative. Iran tried to kill me. After he became president, he said of the airstrike that killed the Ayatollah, "I got him before he got me." Now, it's my assessment, and I labeled as such, that the personal dimension of this conflict should not be underestimated. A man who believes a foreign government tried to kill him is not evaluating intelligence about that government with detachment. He is evaluating through the lens of a man who was shot, and the people around him, Netanyahu, Graham, and others, understood this. Which brings us to the present, and to what Trump is now telling the American people about why this war is necessary. On March 13th, 2026, yesterday, as we prepared this episode, President Trump sat down with YouTube personality Jake Paul for an interview that has been widely shared.
I was a bit shocked too. Like, everyone else in the world was like, "This is the greatest thing," and I think what you're doing is phenomenal. And I was shocked that so many activists, like in America, didn't like it. But meanwhile, they're like, "Oh, well, we support women. We want women to have all these rights." Meanwhile, you're liberating the women of Iran, and then they have an issue with it. I thought that was very confusing.
We support gays, but they throw gays off the buildings, okay? We support this. I mean, the things they do, and they're fighting. But I think I have tremendous support on this. This is something that's been incredible. I have the best poll numbers I've ever had now.
Yeah.
And it's not because of this. I think we've just, the economy is great. It's a little bit of we take a little winding road for a little while, but we have to wipe out the evil. It's an evil curse. They're evil people.
1 week earlier, on March 8th, aboard Air Force One, a reporter asked Trump about reports the United States had struck a desalination plant in Tehran. Trump's response: "They are among the most evil people on earth. They cut babies' heads off. They chop women in half. Take a look at October 7th. The President of the United States, when asked about the bombing of civilian infrastructure in a country of 90 million people, responded by claiming that Iranians cut babies' heads off. He was conflating Iran with Hamas. No Iranians participated in October 7th attack. The U.S. intelligence community has assessed that Iran's leaders were actually surprised by the attack. And the specific claim about beheaded babies, originally attributed to October 7th, was investigated repeatedly by multiple news organizations, including CNN, Le Monde, and Haaretz, and was never verified by Israeli authorities. The Times of Israel itself, in reporting on Trump's remarks, noted that he appeared to be conflating Iran and Hamas, and that the claim of beheaded babies has never been confirmed. This is the information environment in which the president is operating. He is repeating unverified atrocity propaganda, conflating the Iranian government with Hamas, and framing the war as a simple battle between good and evil that he believes is popular. We must do something that is difficult but essential, I think. We must set aside the caricature and look at what Iran actually was before the bombs fell. Iran is a country of approximately 95 million people. It is not a monolith. Like every large nation, it contains multitudes, urban and rural, secular and religious, reformist and conservative, young and old. Tehran, before this war, was a city of 10 million people. It had universities, a film industry internationally recognized for its artistry, a tech sector, a vibrant cafe culture, and a generation of young people who were, by all observable measures, becoming more westernized and more secular with each passing year. Women in Tehran pushed the boundaries of the hijab laws. Young Iranians used VPNs to access social media, and the reform movement, while constrained by the theocratic system, was real and growing. This is not propaganda. This is observable fact, documented by journalists, academics, and Iranians themselves. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was 86 years old. He had been treated for prostate cancer since 2014. After the June 2025 strikes, he appeared frail in public. And for the first time since he assumed power, he failed to appear at an annual military commemoration. His health had been the subject of speculation for years, with Western intelligence sources reporting as early as 2015 that he might have limited time remaining. 86 years old with prostate cancer. The succession question was very much alive. Multiple reports from the Council on Foreign Relations, the Middle East Institute, and the Washington Institute indicated that Khamenei had reportedly opposed his own son, Mujtaba, from succeeding him. The regime's aversion to hereditary succession was rooted in the 1979 revolution itself, which was the overthrow of the Shah's dynasty as a founding act of the Islamic Republic. When Ayatollah Khomeini died in 1989, his own son was not even considered for the position. And Iran was negotiating. In February 2026, American and Iranian officials held indirect talks in Muscat, Oman, the first significant diplomatic engagements in years. Both sides described the talks as a good start. On February 25th, 2026, 3 days before the bombs fell, the Iranian foreign minister stated publicly that a historic agreement with the United States was within reach. Within reach. Now, in late December 2025 and January 2026, massive protests erupted across Iran. They were driven by economic collapse, a plunging currency, and years of accumulated grievance against the regime. Iranian security forces responded with lethal force, killing thousands of demonstrators, according to human rights organizations. These protests were real. The suffering of the Iranian people was real. The brutality of crackdown was real. I do not dispute any of this. But I must raise a point that our listeners who have followed the Empire of Liberty series will recognize immediately. If you were convinced that Iran was on the brink of a popular revolution, that regime was about to fall of its own accord, then I would ask you to remember the history we have examined together. In 1953, as we covered in detail in episode 9 of our series, the CIA spent approximately $1 million to manufacture the appearance of popular uprising in Iran. They bribed politicians, they bribed journalists, they bribed clerics, they hired mobs, both communist mobs designed to frighten the middle class and royalist mobs designed to demand the Shah's return. The chaos was deliberate. The goal was to create the disorder so severe that military intervention would seem necessary, even welcome. This was denied by the CIA for 60 years until finally revealed in 2013. And we know in Guatemala in 1954, the same playbook. In Chile in 1973, in Libya 2011, and in Syria throughout the 2010s. The pattern is documented, now declassified, and acknowledged by the CIA itself. Now, I'm not claiming that the 2026 Iranian protests were entirely manufactured by Western intelligence agencies. I do not have evidence to make that claim, and I will not make claims without evidence. What I am saying is this: we have a documented, decades-long pattern of the United States manufacturing or amplifying unrest in countries it wishes to destabilize, including in Iran itself. Given that pattern, any American who watched the protests and concluded with certainty that revolution was imminent and that military intervention would merely assist what was already happening should exercise a degree of skepticism. The skepticism is not cynicism. It is the informed caution of a citizen who knows his own government's history. Here is what I believe the evidence shows. And again, I identify this as my informed assessment. Iran was evolving, slowly, imperfectly, and against the resistance of its own hardliners, but evolving nonetheless. The urban centers were becoming more progressive. The younger generation was increasingly disconnected from the revolutionary ideology of 1979. The supreme leader was elderly and dying. The succession, while uncertain, was going to happen, whether the United States intervened or not. The diplomatic channel was open. Negotiations were underway. Iran's foreign minister said a deal was within reach. And then we bombed them. Trump told Jake Paul that he has the best poll numbers I ever had and tremendous support for the war. The evidence suggests otherwise. Every polling showed limited public support for the strikes, including among Republicans. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh captured the sentiment of a significant portion of Trump's own base when he posted, "So far, we have heard that although we have killed the whole Iranian regime, this was not a regime change war. And although we obliterated their nuclear program, we had to do this because of their nuclear program. And although Iran was not planning any attacks on the U.S., they also might." NPR reported that the online backlash aligned with early public polling showed limited support, including from Republicans who are normally willing to give Trump considerable latitude. Fortune magazine reported that Trump has cycled from calls for unconditional surrender to sounding amenable and to an end state in which Iran trades one hardline Ayatollah for another. A description of a leader who is reading the polls and adjusting in real time. The war was not popular. It is not popular. The president believed he would be popular because the people advising him told him it would be. He framed it in the language of good versus evil because that is the only framework that can make a war of choice seem like a war of necessity. What we have witnessed is a case study in how a populist leader is maneuvered into a war he spent a decade opposing. The tools were foreign intelligence, presented through a sympathetic intermediary, a coordinated media strategy aimed at one audience member, the president, personal grievance weaponized into national policy, and a moral framework so simple it could be communicated in an interview with a YouTube boxer. We have to wipe out the evil. They are evil people. That's not foreign policy. That is not a strategy. That is not an analysis of American national interest. It's a slogan, and slogans do not survive contact with reality. We're watching that collision right now, in real time, on the streets of Tehran. Earlier, we examined the man who wanted this war for 30 years. And then we examined how the man who had to authorize it was persuaded. Now we examine the supporting cast. the members of Congress, and the figures across both parties who pushed, enabled, or laid the groundwork for this war. We begin with a man who, by his own account, made it happen. Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina has supported virtually every American military intervention in the Middle East over the past 2 decades, including the 2003 Iraq War. He has advocated for war with Iran for years.
Let Russia drop. For instance, this guy, Lindsey Graham. You have a guy, he's one of the dumbest human beings I've ever seen. He runs against me, okay? He runs against me for president. He starts off at 6%, and he hits me. And I start, although I did give out his phone number, I mean, that's really good. But anyway, he starts hitting me, saying vicious things, and now he starts going down. He goes to 5%, 4%. He ends up at 0. Here's a guy running for the presidency. He's at 0. He leaves in disgrace, in my opinion. I think he's disgraced. He comes here. He thinks this is going to be good. He had like 2 points here, and I had 42, right? I was at 42. He's a sitting United States Senator from South Carolina. He's at 2%. I saw him on television this morning, and I think he lost it. He's saying, Donald Trump, he couldn't even talk. He was shaking. The hatred. They say, what do you think of Donald Trump? Oh, he went crazy. The guy is a nut job. I mean, and honestly, I don't want his endorsement. I don't want anything to do with him. And his thinking, he says, I know so much. He knows about the military. I could push him over with a little thimble. Boom. And I look at a guy like Lindsey Graham. Then I hear his theory on the war. You'll be in there forever. You'll be in there, and you'll end up starting World War III with a guy like that, too. We don't want World War III over Syria. Okay, we don't want do we agree with that? We don't want World War. But
President Trump is on Team Graham.
Senator Lindsey Graham, he's a good man, and he loves you, and he loves this state.
Trump endorsed Lindsey Graham, a conservative leader trusted by Trump, endorsed by Trump.
Thank you, Lindsey.
When this regime goes down, we're going to have a new Mideast. We're going to make a ton of money. Nobody will threaten the Straits of Hormuz again.
And in March 2026, he is not hiding at all from that record. He is boasting about it. Let me present his own words. All of the quotations that follow are sourced, dated, and verifiable. In February 2026, the United States was building up forces in the Middle East, and what would become the largest deployment since the 2003 Iraq invasion, Graham told Sky News Arabia, all these ships are not coming here because it's the nice time of year. We need military action, probably. The military capability is being built up as I speak. The inflection point is weeks away, not months away. He quoted President Trump telling Iranian protesters, keep protesting, help is on the way, and added, the best way to make Iran great again is for the people to take over from the Ayatollahs. On February 16, 2026, 12 days before the war began, Graham appeared at the David Kempsky Hotel in Tel Aviv holding a Make Iran Great Again hat. As reported by the Wall Street Journal on March 7th, Graham had spent months working to bring Trump to the point of authorizing strikes. He made multiple trips to Israel, meeting with Mossad officials and coaching Netanyahu on how to present intelligence to Trump. He coordinated with General Jack Keane and columnist Mark Thiessen to place pro-war commentary and media outlets Trump was known to watch. Graham's own words, published in the Journal, they will tell me things our government will not tell me. A sitting U.S. senator traveled to a foreign country, received intelligence from that country's spy agency. Intelligence he says his own government would not share with him, and then used that intelligence to lobby the President of the United States for war. He described his method of persuading the president with a word association game. I say Franklin Roosevelt, what do you say? But it is what Graham did after the war began that most clearly reveals his motivations. On March 9, 2026, Graham appeared on Fox News and made the following statement. When this regime goes down, we are going to have a new Middle East, and we are going to make a ton of money. He continued, Venezuela and Iran will have 31% of the world's oil reserves. We are going to have a partnership with 31% of the known reserves. This is China's nightmare. This is a good investment. When Fox News host Maria Bartiromo asked Graham about the estimated $1 billion per day the war was costing, he responded, "Best money ever spent." He then predicted the attacks on Iran would escalate in the coming 2 weeks, saying the United States would blow the hell out of these people. On the same day, after Israel struck oil deposits across Tehran, turning the sky black with toxic smoke, causing acid rain to fall on 10 million people, Graham posted on social media praising Israel's amazing capability, but cautioning Israel to be selective in its targeting so as not to cripple their chances to start a new and better life when this regime collapses. He added, "The oil economy of Iran will be essential to that endeavor." Think about that again. The senator is cautioning Israel not to destroy too much of Iran's oil infrastructure, not because of human suffering, not because of the environmental devastation, not because 10 million people are breathing toxic air, but because that oil infrastructure will be essential to the profits it is promised. Graham also addressed critics of the war. He classified them as anti-Semites and isolationists. He told them, "I am not with you. I will be with Israel till our dying day." He suggested that America should move all our stuff to Israel. He offered Saudi Arabia a mutual defense treaty on live television, a commitment that rests squarely within presidential, not senatorial authority. Former Fox News host Megyn Kelly captured the reaction when she asked, "When did Lindsey Graham become our president?" In a single 24-hour period, Graham issued warnings or demands to Lebanon, Cuba, Saudi Arabia, and the wider Arab region, and Spain. So let me be precise about what we just documented. A United States senator received intelligence from a foreign spy agency. He used that intelligence to lobby the president for war. He coached the foreign leader on how to present the case. He coordinated a media strategy to ensure the president heard the right voices. He publicly celebrated when the war began. He described it as a financial investment. He promised profits from the oil reserves of the country being bombed. And he threatened or admonished half a dozen nations in the span of a day. This is the man who, more than any other single figure in the United States Congress, bears responsibility for this war, and he is proud of it. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas presents a more complicated case. Unlike Graham, Cruz opposed the Iraq War and has acknowledged it was a mistake. He has positioned himself as a more cautious senator on foreign intervention. But on Iran, Cruz has arrived at the same destination by a different route. In February 2026, as talks between the United States and Iran continued in Geneva, Cruz appeared on Fox News and dismissed the possibility of any diplomatic solution. "I believe there is no deal to be had in terms of the nuclear program." He added that Khamenei's only option was to leave power. "Let me leave. Let me go to Russia. Let me go somewhere else other than here." After the war began, the Wall Street Journal report detailing Graham's role as Netanyahu's coach and intermediary drew scrutiny, even with conservative media. On Fox News, Lauren Ingram read the key passage to Cruz on air. Ingram then asked Cruz directly, "Is a senator speaking to a foreign leader on the precipice of war and seeming to act as an intermediary, is that the right way to go?" Cruz's response, "Well, listen, Lindsey is passionate about defending America, and he's on the road a lot." Ingram pressed further, noting that this was of a totally different level than routine congressional engagement with foreign leaders. Cruz deflected again. When it comes to the threat Iran poses, Lindsay agrees they pose a major threat to America, and I agree they pose a major threat to America. Look, Lindsay and I disagreed on the Iraq War. He thought Iraq was a good idea. I thought Iraq war was a mistake. I think Iran is fundamentally different. Know what Cruz did not do. He did not answer the question. He did not say whether it was appropriate for a United States senator to coach a foreign prime minister on how to lobby the American president into war. He did not address the extraordinary fact that Graham was receiving intelligence from a foreign spy agency that he said his own government would not provide. He pivoted to the shared premise, Iran is a threat, and used it to avoid the procedural question entirely. This is how enabling works. You do not need to be the architect. You only need to refuse the question, the architect's methods. Cruz did draw one distinction from Graham. He said there would be no ground invasion, no deployment of hundreds of thousands of troops. But he endorsed the fundamental premise: diplomacy had failed, the regime must go, the military force was justified. Now, how he can square one with the other, I'm not sure. Every intelligence agency says that for a regime change to happen, you need sustained ground troops. But Cruz's role is important, not because he orchestrated the war, Graham did that, but because he represents the broader Republican consensus that enabled it. By refusing to challenge Graham's extraordinary conduct as an intermediary for a foreign government, by dismissing diplomacy before it had been fully attempted, by framing the war as fundamentally different from Iraq without explaining how regime change in a nation of 95 million people would produce a different outcome, Cruz provided the intellectual cover that Graham's naked enthusiasm could not. Now, if this were a war pushed only by 2 Republican senators and an Israeli prime minister, it could not have happened. The institutional pressure to confront Iran, though, has been bipartisan, sustained across decades, and maintained by figures in both parties. Understanding this is essential because it means that opposing the war cannot be reduced to opposing one party or one president. Nikki Haley has been among the most vocal advocates for military confrontation with Iran across both Trump's terms. As UN ambassador during Trump's first term, she stood before missile fragments in a presentation that critics compared directly to Colin Powell's case for the Iraq War, and declared that Iran's fingerprints were on every conflict in the Middle East. Trisha Parsi of the National Iranian American Council said at the time, "Make no mistake, what Nikki Haley is doing right now is laying the groundwork for a U.S.-Iran war." After the war began, she called it a history-defining moment and a legacy-defining moment for Trump. She framed it as a war of good against evil, the same framing Trump would adopt. She argued that the war gave Trump leverage over Russia in the Ukraine negotiations and would make China think twice about Taiwan, threatening the destruction of a nation of 95 million people as a useful signal to other adversaries. To her credit, Haley did urge during the June 2025 12-day war that the United States should not engage in regime change. The Iranian people should decide who they want to be their leader. That's their decision, not ours. But by March 2026, the regime change explicitly underway. She offered no such caution. She instead attacked Democrats who questioned the war and called it absurd to suggest that the Iranian regime was no threat to America. Now we turn to the other side of the aisle. And this is where the analysis becomes uncomfortable for those who believe the Democratic Party represents the anti-war position. Chuck Schumer, then the most influential Jewish Democrat in the Senate and next in line for the party's leadership, voted against the JCPOA in 2015, breaking with President Obama on the signature diplomatic achievement of his presidency. Schumer wrote that he believed Iran will not change and that under the agreement, it would achieve its dual goals of eliminating sanctions while ultimately retaining its nuclear and non-nuclear power. He was one of only 4 Senate Democrats to oppose the deal. But the irony is a little bit layered. Schumer opposed the deal when it existed, then criticized Trump for withdrawing from it in 2018, saying the administration had a slogan but no plan. Then in March 2026, he stood on the Senate floor demanding strategic clarity from the very war the deal's collapse helped make possible. This is not hypocrisy in the simple sense. It's the institutional incoherence of a political class that destroyed every diplomatic off-ramp and then expressed shock at arriving at the military destination. Antony Blinken, who served as Secretary of State under President Biden, maintained the sanctions architecture against Iran that Trump's first term had imposed. The Biden administration did not return to the JCPOA. It did not lift the maximum pressure campaign. It added additional sanctions. When Biden left office, Iran was under more economic pressure than it had been at any point since the revolution. Blinken's State Department described Iran as the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, the same language used to justify the war now underway. Susan Rice, who served as National Security Advisor under Obama, was instrumental in shaping the framework through which the United States engaged with Iran, a framework that treated Iran as a threat to be managed, not a nation to be understood. While the Obama administration did negotiate the JCPOA, a genuine diplomatic achievement, it simultaneously maintained covert operations, cyber warfare against Iran's nuclear facilities, and sanctions regime that devastated the Iranian economy. Barack Obama signed the JCPOA, which was the most significant diplomatic engagement with Iran since 1979. For this, he deserves credit. But Obama also dramatically expanded the use of drone strikes, normalized extrajudicial killing as an instrument of executive power, and built the legal and institutional framework for the kind of unilateral military action that Trump is now employing. The precedent that a president can kill foreign officials and wage undeclared wars without congressional authorization did not begin with Trump, but it was refined under Obama. And there's one more element of the Obama's record that must be acknowledged, because it illustrates the confusion, or perhaps the cynicism, of American policy toward Iran. In 2016, the Obama administration paid $1.7 billion. Say that again. In 2016, the Obama administration paid $1.7 billion in cash to Iran. The payment was structured as a settlement of decades-old legal grievances over a failed arms deal with the Shah's government. The Shah's government before 1979. So the timing, 2016, was made even more extraordinary because the cash was delivered on the same day that Iran released 4 American prisoners. The administration insisted that it was not a ransom. Senior Justice Department officials warned that Iran would see it exactly as that. A House Financial Services Subcommittee investigation found that the payment was structured in a way that made it, and I am quoting the committee's findings, easy for the world's biggest state sponsor of terrorism to move the money anywhere it wants. The committee heard testimony that because of the particular nature of the payment, Iran believed this to be a ransom and consequently may be more inclined to seize Americans in the future. Consider the Americans' position from Iran's perspective. The United States overthrew their government in 1953, armed their enemies in Iraq in the 1980s, imposed decades of crippling sanctions, negotiated a nuclear deal, then abandoned it, set $1.7 billion in cash, money that undoubtedly flowed into the very military and proxy networks we now cite as justification for war, and then bombed them. This is not a coherent foreign policy. This is a series of contradictions that, taken together, suggest the United States has never known what it wants from Iran except compliance. And when compliance is not offered, the answer has always been the same: more pressure, more sanctions, and ultimately, more bombs. Kamala Harris, as vice president and then as the 2024 Democratic presidential nominee, did not challenge the fundamental assumptions about Iran. She did not call for a return to the JCPOA. She did not propose an alternative diplomatic framework. The Democratic Party, with few exceptions, accepted the premise that Iran was a rogue state that must be contained, differing from the Republicans only on whether containment should be achieved through sanctions and diplomacy or through military force. The point is that both parties are not identical. They're not. The JCPOA was a genuine difference. Obama pursued diplomacy where Netanyahu demanded war. Sanders and a few others have consistently opposed military confrontation. And then Thomas Massie, Rand Paul, and Ro Khanna tried to reassert congressional war powers. The point is that institutional pressure towards confrontation with Iran has been bipartisan for decades. The intelligence community, the defense establishment, the think tanks, the media ecosystem, all of these reinforced the framing of Iran as America's enemy. When the moment came, the machinery was already built. It only needed someone to turn the key. Which brings us to the most damning fact of all. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution grants Congress, not the president, the power to declare war. The founders debated this question specifically and resolved it deliberately. As James Madison wrote, the executive branch is the department of power most interested in war and most prone to it. Congress was on recess when the bombs fell on February 28, 2026. When Congress did return, Representatives Thomas Massie of Kentucky, a libertarian Republican, and Ro Khanna of California, a progressive Democrat, forced a vote on the War Powers Resolution. Their resolution, H.R. 38, called on the president to terminate the use of armed forces against Iran unless Congress authorized it through a declaration of war. The day before, the Senate rejected a similar resolution introduced by Tim Kaine and Rand Paul by a vote of 47 to 53. Rand Paul was the only Republican to vote in favor. John Fetterman was the only Democrat to vote against. Fetterman's stated position, posted on social media, was few words. My vote is Operation Epic Fury. The House vote came the following day, March 5th, 2026. It failed 212 to 219. Two Republicans voted for it, Massie and Warren Davidson of Ohio. 4 Democrats voted against it, Henry Cuellar of Texas, Jared Golden of Maine, Greg Landsman of Ohio, and Juan Vargas of California. 2 Republicans in the entire United States Congress, 2 House Republicans and 1 Republican senator were willing to insist that the Constitution be followed before the nation goes to war. During floor debate, Massie said something that deserves to be heard. If American blood is to be shed, that decision should be voted on by Congress. The debate is meant to be arduous, and that vote is meant to be hard. I think my colleagues do not want to go on record because we have a terrible track record of meddling in the Middle East. He was right. They did not want to go on record, and they did not have to, because the vote failed, and the war continued without their fingerprints on it. The failed vote amounts to what it is, a congressional endorsement of the war by silence. The Constitution was not overridden. It was simply ignored. Lindsey Graham is offering mutual defense treaties to foreign nations on television. Ted Cruz is dismissing the possibility of diplomacy. Nikki Haley is calling it a history-defining moment. Chuck Schumer is demanding strategic clarity for a war that his own vote against the JCPOA helped make possible. And Thomas Massie is standing nearly alone in his own party. asking that the document they all swore to uphold be consulted before Americans die. The founders were not naive about war. They knew it would sometimes be necessary, but they built a system in which the decision would be made by the people's representatives, not by a president persuaded over a round of golf, not by a senator coaching a foreign spy agency, and not by a populist who believed the polls were in his favor. The system has failed. It did not fail because it was poorly designed. It failed because the people entrusted with it chose not to use it. We have now examined the motivation. Netanyahu's 30-year campaign, Trump's transformation from anti-war populist to wartime president, Graham's orchestration, the bipartisan institutional pressure that made it all possible, the constitutional abdication that permitted it. Now we must look at what actually happened. Not the rhetoric, not the slogans, not wiping out evil. What has actually been done to Iran, to the region, to us, in the 2 weeks since the bombings began? As of today, March 14, 2026, Iran's health ministry reports that more than 1,400 civilians have been killed by American and Israeli strikes. The Iranian Red Crescent Society reports that 65 schools and 32 medical facilities have been hit. More than 10,000 civilian sites have been damaged. Among the dead are approximately 175 schoolgirls and staff from an elementary school in Manab. The school was struck on the first day of the war. A United Nations panel said most of the victims were girls between the ages of 7 and 12. Preliminary findings from the United States military investigation reported by the New York Times indicate that a Tomahawk missile, an American weapon, struck the school based on outdated targeting information. The school was struck. Surviving students huddled together in a conference room, waiting to see if they had surviving parents to come get them. 40 minutes later, the school and those huddled children were struck again by another missile. This is what Lindsey Graham celebrates. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child called it a grave violation of the protection afforded to schools under the international humanitarian law. UNESCO concurred. When asked about the strike, President Trump claimed Iran had bombed its own school. When pressed further 2 days later, he admitted, "I just do not know enough about it." When Defense Secretary Hegseth was asked, he said, "We are investigating that. We, of course, never target civilian targets." He had said one day earlier, "Our warfighters have maximum authorities. We are punching them while they are down," which is exactly how it should be. It has now been confirmed that it was, in fact, the United States that struck that school. 7 American service members have been killed by Iranian retaliatory strikes. Over 140 have been wounded. An American refueling aircraft crashed over Iraq, killing all 6 crew members. In Lebanon, where Hezbollah resumed strikes on Israel and Israel resumed the bombing of Beirut, more than 700 people have been killed and 800,000 displaced. In Israel, at least 15 people have been killed by Iranian missile strikes. Casualties have been reported in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, Jordan, and Iraq. An Iranian missile was intercepted over Turkish airspace, a NATO country. The war has not been contained. It has metastasized across the entire Middle East. On March 8th, Israeli weapons struck oil depots across Tehran and the surrounding province. The strikes hit the oil warehouse in northeast Tehran, the Tehran refinery in the south, and the Sharon oil depot in the west, and an oil depot in Karaj. The sky over Tehran turned black. Oil leaked into the streets of the Saran district. 10 million people breathed toxic air. The Iranian Red Crescent Society warned that the smoke contained high concentrations of toxic hydrocarbons, sulfur, and nitrogen oxides. Any rainfall passing through these plumes, they warned, becomes highly acidic, posing risk of skin burns and severe lung damage. Acid rain fell on Tehran. Residents described walking with their eyes burning and pain in their throats. These are the people we are told we are liberating. The progressive, westernizing, urban population of Tehran, the young people using VPNs, the women pushing back against the hijab, the cafe culture, the film industry. They are not liberated. They are breathing acid. Yesterday, March 13th, President Trump announced that the United States military had totally obliterated every military target on Karg Island, Iran's primary export terminal. Karg Island handles the vast majority of Iran's oil exports. Senator Graham had cautioned Israel not to destroy too much of the oil infrastructure because the oil economy of Iran will be essential to future profits. Yesterday, we obliterated the island that makes that economy function. Oil prices have spiked, up 27% in 1 week after the war began. The price of Brent crude has exceeded $100 per barrel. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil supply passes, has become a combat zone. Iran's IRGC has fired on vessels. Oil tankers have been struck in Iraqi waters. Shipping has been rerouted. The International Energy Agency has agreed to release a record 400 million barrels of crude from emergency reserves, more than double the amount released after Russia invaded Ukraine. The IEA warned that the war is causing what it called the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. And this week, the president announced that we will be lifting sanctions on Russian oil. Despite Trump's claims that the straits are in great shape, global flights in and out of the Middle East have been halted. Embassies have been evacuated. Citi has evacuated its Dubai office. PricewaterhouseCoopers has closed offices across the Gulf. Schools in Qatar have moved to remote learning. And Ramadan gatherings have been suspended. This is costing the American taxpayer an estimated $1 billion per day. Lindsey Graham called it the best money ever spent. What about the consequences? Not the consequences of the next news cycle, but the consequences that will arrive in years, in decades. Our intelligence community assessed before the strikes began the Khamenei's most likely successors would be hardline leaders from the IRGC, the very organization responsible for Iran's nuclear and missile programs. The Council on Foreign Relations warned that the strikes might produce not the liberal democracy Trump envisions, but a more radical, more militarized regime. This is exactly what happened. March 8, 2026, the Assembly of Experts, under pressure from the IRGC, elected Mojtaba Khamenei as the new supreme leader, the son. The man Ali Khamenei had reportedly not wanted to succeed him. The man whose appointment analysts warned would signal a shift toward military dictatorship behind a clerical facade. Mojtaba Khamenei's first public statement demanded the immediate closure of all American military bases in the Middle East and declared that the Strait of Hormuz must remain closed as leverage against Iran's enemies. Rallies were held in Tehran in support of the new leader. The IRGC is more powerful, not less. The reformist movement, the organic, internal evolution we documented previously, has been buried under rubble and toxic smoke. The people who might have changed Iran from within are now either dead, displaced, or rallying around a government they have despised 2 weeks ago. Because when your country is being bombed, you do not protest your government. You defend your home. This is the pattern. It's always the pattern. In 1953, we overthrew Mossadegh, a democratic nationalist, and installed the Shah. 26 years later, the blowback arrived. The Islamic Revolution, the hostage crisis, 4 decades of instability and hostility. In 2003, we invaded Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein. The blowback? ISIS. The destabilization of the entire region, Iranian influence spreading across Iraq and Syria, and the refugee crisis that reshaped European politics. In 2011, we helped topple Gaddafi in Libya. The blowback? A failed state, open slave markets, and a migrant crisis across the Mediterranean. Every time we are told the next one will be different, every time it is not. I want to close with what I believe. I'll be direct about it because you deserve directness. It's true that Iran funded Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. It's documented, not in dispute. It's true that Iran was involved in the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983 through its support of those in those networks. 241 American service members were killed. That's a fact, and it should never be forgotten. But if we're going to remember that, then we must also remember this. During the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988, the United States provided economic support, intelligence, and indirect military assistance to Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Iraq used chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and civilians. Approximately 700,000 Iranians were killed in that war, many by chemical weapons deployed while Iraq was receiving American intelligence on Iranian troop movements. None of this is excusable on either side, and none of it on either side should be conveniently forgotten. All war is terrible. I believe that to my core. Some wars may be necessary when a nation faces an existential threat, when all other options have been exhausted, when the people's representatives had debated and authorized the use of force. This is not one of those wars. Iran was negotiating. Its foreign minister called a deal within reach 3 days before the bombs fell. Its supreme leader was 86 years old, suffering from prostate cancer and frail. His death and the succession crisis that would follow was coming regardless whether we dropped a single bomb. Iran's society was evolving, imperfectly but genuinely, and from within. The American intelligence community found no imminent threat. The Defense Intelligence Agency concluded it would be a decade before Iran could develop missiles capable of reaching the United States. The IAEA said there was no evidence of an organized nuclear weapons program. Congress did not authorize this war. The Constitution was not followed. The War Power Resolution, to even get to the point for Congress to do any authorization, failed along party lines. And now we must live with what we have done. 65 schools damaged, 32 hospitals hit, an elementary school full of girls struck by an American missile on the first day. Acid rain falling on a city of 10 million. The largest oil supply disruption in history. $1 billion a day. 7 Americans dead. Over 1,000 Iranian civilians dead. A new hardline supreme leader installed. The opposite of what we were told this war would achieve. And the blowback that will not arrive tomorrow, or perhaps not next year, but in 5 years, or 10, or 26. Just as 1953 produced 1979, there is a generation of Iranian children who suffered those strikes. There is a generation who saw the sky turn black over their homes. There is a generation who buried their classmates from the school in Manab. They will remember who did this. They will remember why. And we will be astonished decades from now when the consequences arrive. Just as we were astonished by the hostage crisis and by September 11th, and by every other act of blowback that our foreign policy establishment treats as an inexplicable mystery rather than a predictable consequence of our own actions. The question this podcast has asked from its first episode remains the question today. Does this leave Americans more free or more governed? We're not more free. We are deeper in debt, deeper in war, deeper in a region we do not understand, serving interests that are not our own at a cost we have not been asked to bear and did not consent to pay. The founders warned us. Washington warned us. The old right warned us. The Iraq War warned us. And here we are again. The only question left is whether we will learn. The historical record suggests we will not. But we owe it to the dead, ours and theirs, to try. We began today with a contradiction. A president who spent a decade opposing regime change launched one. We traced how that happened, who wanted it, who orchestrated it, who enabled it, who failed to stop it. We documented Benjamin Netanyahu's 34-year campaign to bring the United States into a war with Iran, a campaign that succeeded not when the threat was greatest, but when the obstacles were fewest and the American president was the most susceptible to persuasion. We documented how a populist was maneuvered through foreign intelligence, coordinated media strategy, personal grievance, and the simplest possible moral framing into authorizing the largest American military operation in the Middle East since Iraq. We documented the war party, the senator who boasted about coaching a foreign leader to lobby our president, who promised profits from the oil reserves of the country being bombed, and who called $1 billion a day the best money ever spent. We documented the bipartisan consensus that destroyed every diplomatic off-ramp and then expressed surprise at the military destination. And we documented the constitutional abdication, the war powers votes that failed, the Congress that chose not to go on record, and the system that worked exactly as the founders feared it would if left in the hands of those unwilling to use it. And we documented the cost. The schools, the hospitals, the elementary school full of girls, the acid rain over Tehran, the oil fires, the energy crisis, the $1 billion a day, the 7 American deaths, the more than 1,400 Iranian civilians dead, the new hardline supreme leader who is the opposite of what this war was supposed to produce. I do not know how this war ends. No one does, including, I suspect, the people who started it. The president said it could last 4 to 5 weeks. Israel has suggested it could last much longer. The Chatham House analysis on the first day of strikes warned that this has the makings of the kind of enduring conflict that Trump said he did not want. What I do know is the pattern is familiar. We have been here before. The names change, the countries change, the justifications change, but the structure is always the same. A threat is inflated, a case is built, dissent is marginalized, Congress abdicates, the bombs fall, the consequences are unexpected, and the people who warned against it are proven right too late to matter. If you followed our Empire of Liberty series, you have seen this pattern traced from the Mexican-American War through the Spanish-American War, through World War I and the Cold War coups, through Iraq. This is not a new story. This is the oldest story in American foreign policy. The only thing that changes is whether we recognize it in time. I want to say one final thing directly to our listeners. You are capable of evaluating this evidence for yourselves. I have told you what is documented fact and what is my assessment. I have presented the strongest case for those who support this war before offering my critique. I have sourced every quotation and identified every opinion. I did this because I respect you and because the people who led us into this war did not. They gave you slogans where they owed you strategy. They gave you evil where they owed you analysis. They gave you Jake Paul where they owed you a congressional debate. You deserve better than that. The dead, ours and theirs, deserve better than that. If you want the historical background for today's episode, I encourage you to listen to our Empire of Liberty series, particularly episode 9, Kermit's Game, on the 1953 CIA coup on Iran, and episode 9B on the evolution of regime change from covert to overt. The patterns we trace in those episodes are playing out right now in real time. I am Jeff Kellick, and this has been a special episode of the Consequential Actions Podcast. Why this war? The motivations behind the war on Iran. If you have found this episode valuable, please subscribe to our Substack page at consequentialactions.com. Every subscription helps. Here you'll find all written articles as well as our previous series on the General Welfare Clause and the New Leviathan. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Consequential Actions Podcast for all video versions of all of our podcast episodes across all of our series. And of course, follow me on X at jkellick for updates, discussions, and announcements. We continue to post articles and welcome your participation. Until next time, have a great day.